How we managed to sleep that night I will never know. It may have been from sheer exhaustion, or perhaps it was the terror instilled in us by Chester's words. But no sooner had he finished his story than sleep moved in quickly and efficiently, like a thief in the night to rob us of our wakefulness. Even Chester slept, although he confessed to me when he woke that he had not slept easily. I knew what he meant. I never have had such nightmares. In one, I was lost in the woods. From all around me, I heard rustling, scampering, someone or something moving about. Every time I ran towards the sounds, they would disappear and start again from another part of the forest. I ran and ran, first toward them, then away, never knowing who or what was making them, always frightened that they would find me before I could find them. It was a different sound that woke me shortly before dawn, the sound of rain. I listened for a time to its patter on the leaves above me, my brain too foggy to make sense of where I was or why I should be afraid. I just knew that I was getting wet, and that I was afraid. "What a night!" I heard Chester say beside me. "They were all around us, Harold." "Who?" I said, yawning loudly. "The spirits. Didn't you hear them?" I thought for a moment. "I heard sounds," I said. "Do you mean they could have been—" "Of course," said Chester. "The 5th of May is St. George's Day. When midnight tolls, the devil has sway." "And while the cat's asleep, the dog runs away," I added. "What do you mean?" I nodded toward the spot where Howie and Dog had fallen asleep the night before. Howie was opening his eyes. He was alone. "Doggone!" he exclaimed. "Just as I thought," said Chester. "He merely pretended to sleep. What fools we've been! Why couldn't we have stayed awake?" "What is it, Pop?" Howie asked, quickly on his feet and at our side. "Did Dog do something wrong?" "Not in your eyes, certainly," Chester replied. He too was on his feet now, pacing nervously. "It all fits into place, just as I suspected. Harold, get up!" I stretched lazily. "Do I have to?" I asked. "Do you ever want to see your family again?" he retorted. "Alive!" I bounded to my feet. "Is it Bud and Spud?" I asked nervously. "Have they done something to the Monroes?" Howie started to sniffle. "Maybe they know about Bunnicula," he said. "Maybe they kidnapped the Monroes to force them to get back Bunnicula." "I think you're confusing things," I told Howie. "It was Fritz and Hans who wanted Bunnicula, not Bud and Spud. Besides, that story was make-believe." "Ha!" Chester snorted. "Woe unto you who believeth not." "On the contrary," I said, "woe unto me who has believeth you too many times. How could that story be real, Chester? And where did you hear it in the first place?" Chester paused long enough to bathe a paw. An evasive tactic if ever I'd seen one. "My sources are confidential," he said at last. It was my turn to snort. "Besides, that story doesn't matter right now. What matters is the fate of the Monroes. I believe that Bud and Spud and Dog were the evil spirits in these woods last night. I believe that Dog purposefully got us lost and wore us out so we'd be out of his master's way all night. I believe that Bud and Spud had harmful intentions regarding the Monroes, and I believe we may be too late." "And woe unto you who believeth not, Uncle Harold," said Howie, beginning to cry in earnest. I confess I felt my own eyes dampening. "I hope for all our sakes that you're wrong, Chester," I said. "Otherwise we'll be orphans, and I'm too old to be an orphan." "We have to get back to camp, Harold," Chester said. "Now." "There's only one problem," I said. "What's that?" "It's pouring." The drenched leaves above our heads were no longer protecting us. Even though I've never cared for the smell of wet dog hair, it wasn't that concerned me as much as the difficulty of tracking in the rain. "If Dog went back to camp," I told Chester, "I would ordinarily be able to follow his scent, but I'm afraid this fresh rain has wiped out that possibility." "Rats," Chester muttered. We'll just have to find our way back as best as we can." We were all set to start out when Howie cried, "Look, Uncle Harold! Look, Pop! He's back!" There, winding his way through the trees in our direction, was Dog. "Did you hear all the commotion?" he asked when he reached us. "I tried to follow it, but the ground was too wet and I lost the trail. Boy, the rain's been coming down for hours. You guys would have slept through anything." "And probably did," said Chester under his breath. "You been up long, Dog?" he asked. "A couple hours." "Chester, did you know you whistle when you sleep?" Seeing the look in Chester's eye, I jumped in before he could respond. The longer we stand here," I pointed out, "the wetter we get. How about taking us back to camp, Dog?" "That's just what I was going to do," said Dog. "I was about to wake you, but then I heard the noise and took off after it. Like I say, I lost it." Chester regarded Dowg suspiciously. "Have you lost your memory concerning the whereabouts of camp as well?" "Nah, it's just down through the woods a piece. You fellas all set to head back?" "How interesting," said Chester, "that you know the way so clearly this morning when you couldn't have found it last night to save your life, or anybody else's." Dowd gave Chester a puzzled look. "I wasn't trying to find camp last night," he said. "I was trying to find the house, and I got lost. Don't you believe me?" Chester said nothing. Dowd's puzzled look was replaced by one of admiration. "You know, Chester," he said, "that was some story you told last night. It really scared me. I mean, it put me to sleep and all. But did I have dreams?" The scar on his jowl glistened as he turned to lead us back to camp. "Dreams played on my mind as I followed along. We had all heard sounds in the night. Were they real, or were they nightmares? Were Chester's fears just dreams of an over-vivid imagination, or was it possible that the spirit of evil was a reality with different names, and 3 of those names were Bud, Spud, and Dowg? What would we find, I asked myself, when we returned to camp? The rain was letting up now. It was starting to get light. Would the Monroes be stirring in their tent, surprised and happy to see us home? Would Toby run out and throw his arms around my neck and tell me how he'd worried about me all night long? Would Mr. Monroe pat my head and scratch the spot between my ears? Would Mrs. Monroe wipe me down with a big soft towel? "There it is!" I heard Dowd call out. In the distance I saw the campsite, and all my thoughts turned into dreams. It was deserted. The Monroes were gone, and so were Bud and Spud. We ran down the slope past the charred remains of a fire. The Monroes' tent, a tarp once held up by poles and clothesline, had collapsed and was now a muddy landscape of canvas peaks and puddled valleys. I sniffed beneath it and was overcome by the scent of wet rubber and mildew. I thought I detected the odor in Mr. Monroe's sour balls, cherry, I think, and Pete's socks as well. But those faint aromas were mere traces, shadows of another time darkening the doorways of my nasal passages. "Boy, they sure must have left in a hurry," Howie said. His words were somewhat garbled by the piece of clothing he carried in his mouth. As he came closer, I recognized it as one of Toby's T-shirts. "Where'd you find that?" I asked. "Over by that log," Howie said, dropping the T-shirt. "And look, Uncle Harold, it's ripped." Chester's eyes grew wide. "A struggle," he said. "Nonsense," I said, not wanting to believe what my eyes were telling me. "The Monroes aren't here because they're somewhere else." "I love your mind, Harold," said Chester. "Let's take that logic just a little further, shall we? Their tent is collapsed, their belongings are strewn about the place, their clothes are torn, and everywhere you look there's blood!" Chester and I jerked our heads to see Howie staring down at the ground. "Blood, Pop," he said. "Uncle Harold, blood!" Could the pool at our feet really be what it seemed? Our eyes followed the reddish trail that led off into the woods. We looked back at each other, too stunned to speak. "I know where they are," a voice said. It was Dowg. In all the excitement, we'd forgotten all about him. "I know where they are," he repeated. "Follow me." Chester and I regarded each other uncertainly. How did Dowg know where the Monroes had gone, unless Bud and Spud were with them? If we followed him, where would he take us? If we didn't follow him, would we ever see home or the Monroes again? And in the end, what choice did we have?